Welcome to episode 4 of my road trip through the American South that I got to do with my buddy Evan this past spring. If you missed the last video from Chattanooga in central Tennessee, feel free to go check that out first. Here we make our way to Alabama for the first time in this channel's history, and a lot of you may be wondering, why the hell would you road trip to a place like that? Well, contrary to popular belief, Alabama, particularly the northern part of the state, is filled to the brim with outstanding natural landmarks. I'm talking waterfalls galore, intriguing river canyons, and one of the most complex cave networks in the country, if not the world. I might go as far as to say that Alabama is the most underrated state I've been to for natural scenery, and I've been to all but 2, so unless Arkansas has something to say about that, well then, there you go. This video will contain everything from 2 of our 3 days spent here. The third gets its own video since the Bankhead National Forest outside of Birmingham is just that unique. But in any case, let's go ahead and get started with DeSoto State Park, home of what might just be Alabama's most iconic waterfall. Covering 3,502 acres, this public recreation area offers 2 different viewing opportunities for DeSoto Falls. The first is an upper overlook, which requires you to park just above the A.A. Miller Dam for a small fee, but what's important to note about this is you can get into all the other Alabama state parks free of charge if visited in the same day, which we of course took advantage of. There's a quick and easy path down to an observation platform, and I was impressed but not blown away since the waterfall was partially blocked. Still, it allows you to get a sense of its scale and admire its spectacular location within a large bowl. It's super cool and you should definitely check it out, but I much prefer the lower view, which is a little over a mile-long hike round trip. The trail begins at a separate parking lot just up the road, and it's actually a lot of fun in addition to being pretty easy. For one, you start by trekking through the inside of these towering rock formations. It's almost as if they form a mini canyon. Then in the latter parts of the hike, I also love the wildflower bloom that I'm sure was extra nice because of the rainy weather that day. I just love that kind of atmosphere on a predominantly waterfall-focused day like this. In no time, you'll make it to the base of the pool in front of DeSoto Falls, which is just fantastic. Alabama, you are off to one hell of a strong start. That is an incredible waterfall.
Yeah, just this location that it's in with this whole little kind of
punch bowl, I guess?
Yeah, I guess punch bowl is the best way to kind of describe it.
It's a huge pool.
Yeah, and then you got the kind of the upper tier of the waterfalls up there with the dam, and then this big sheer drop, and yeah, this is definitely an amazing waterfall.
At 104 feet tall, DeSoto Falls is the highest waterfall in Alabama, and it was flowing tremendously well during our trip. I'm absolutely obsessed with its appearance, as it fits right in with what I'd come to expect from the region, especially as it relates to the cliffs surrounding the falls. Just a wonderful place to visit overall, and it doesn't take a lot of time to bang out, even if you want to see both vantages like we did. Now, coming right up on the border of the state park is another highly anticipated location, and that's Little River Canyon National Preserve. Alright, we are now in Little River Canyon National Preserve, probably Alabama's most famous natural landmark. We're going to stop at a bunch of different viewpoints, and I'm really looking forward to it. Created by an act of Congress in 1992, the 15,288-acre preserve, administered by the National Park Service, protects what is sometimes said to be the nation's longest mountaintop river. The Little River, which the park is named after, is absolutely gorgeous, and I've heard it offers excellent rafting opportunity. That, among other things, is why I've heard Little River Canyon described as a smaller, New River Gorge from West Virginia, which is a full-fledged national park. Personally, I see many similarities for sure, even if I think the scale of New River Gorge is a decent bit more impressive. I still think this is a great spot though, especially for the large waterfall found towards the head of the canyon. The 45-foot-high river fall is probably the most photographed waterfall in the state, and it's part of the reason I believe Little River Canyon might be the most iconic and well-known natural landmark in Alabama. I definitely suggest stopping off at Little River Canyon Falls Park, found just after the park's entrance road, meaning you'll have to backtrack a little bit, but who cares when your view looks like this? And there's basically no effort involved either, just a super short walk, and bam, there it is. Now once you're on the main road, you'll begin seeing pullout after pullout for a variety of different canyon views. The first of these features the aforementioned waterfall out in the distance, but otherwise it's rather unimpressive as Little River Canyon is, well, little up to this point. But it rapidly grows in size from here as its depth goes over 600 feet in some areas. Flowers often made for a spectacular foreground in my video shots too, and though more scarce than other canyons in the eastern United States, I appreciated the exposed cliffs around the far rim. And also the ambiance generated by the weather conditions was super lovable, as although I prefer cloudless days for super expansive views, these weren't disrupted at all, and I'd say the fog even added to the different overlooks. One other thing that I wanted to note, I didn't think Little River Canyon had a standout observation point like many of the canyons I have visited, but most of the ones we stopped at were consistently engaging. Eventually, the road you're on actually diverges from Little River as it has to work its way around Bear Creek, and in doing so, you'll actually pass another waterfall, this one being seasonal, and it's called Grace's High Falls. It didn't have a lot of flow when we visited in the spring, which is peak season for waterfalls here, but when it is going, some consider it Alabama's tallest fall as it's over 130 feet high. Personally, I agree with the consensus that DeSoto Falls holds the record, as that one's exponentially more consistent regardless of the season. Lastly, you got one final overlook before exiting the park, and it's another great one, with perhaps the most defined cliff formations in the park. With this rain and fog and clouds rolling through the canyon, this is an experience that I just was not expecting out of Little River Canyon. But I have to say, I think it's because of that this place really exceeded expectations for me, actually. It's not the biggest canyon I've ever been in, but it has a lot of unique features.
Yeah, it's not the most incredible place I've ever been to, but it's just super awesome for this part of the country, and I can definitely see why this is the most famous natural scenery spot in all of Alabama.
To get to our next spot, you'll drive along Little River for a while longer and continue in the same direction once it's gone, totaling to 40 minutes before you hit the town of Gogston. Nakalula Falls Park is a 250-acre public park whose main feature is a 90-foot tall waterfall. Despite its incredibly close proximity to Gogston, Alabama, it actually seemed really well kept with a cool path going out over the falls. After you park up, you'll head across a bridge over Black Creek, and shortly thereafter it became abundantly clear that this was going to be the most powerful waterfall in Alabama and possibly also of our entire trip. So much so that the water level went to this brownish yellow, which means the water level has risen a lot, so I'm sure the rain that day had something to do with that. But like with most waterfalls, I'm a base view kind of guy, and Nakalula Falls has that option on offer too. We probably went about 1.5 miles to reach the bottom of the waterfall, though it can be cut short by a handful of shortcuts that usually have these ropes to assist you. These are quite tough though, so I wouldn't recommend them to everyone. We marched through the muddy, partially flooded trail, which was rather unpleasant, but man was it worth it, because this thing was unbelievable from down here. And a large part of that is because it's one of the only falls in the region, and possibly the only one in Alabama, that allows you to walk behind it. See, because it's held up by this massive rock overhang, the trail was able to proceed into what is basically a cave. I've actually experienced tons of waterfalls like this in Oregon, and along with its sheer power, I'd say Nakalula Falls feels like it was picked up from over there and dropped off in Alabama. It's such an incredible spot and definitely one of the most underrated in the state. It's pretty amazing. One of our afterthoughts in this video is Nakalula Falls. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. This is mind-blowing. I think when all is said and done, this could be the best waterfall in all of Alabama.
Coming on this trip, we were going to see a lot of awesome waterfalls, and this is one of those waterfalls that just kind of, I don't know why it just flew on the radar for us, but after coming here, this place is just, it's so cool. Some of it could just be like, we're in a rainstorm today, so the flow of the waterfall is really good, but probably going to be one of our favorite waterfalls of the entire trip.
I can't believe we're in Alabama.
Yeah, this is definitely probably the best waterfall in Alabama, and yeah, it's unbelievable that this is actually here.
Now up next, I want to begin talking about Alabama's caves, and as I alluded to in the intro, this state contains some of the most impressive ones in America. I know people love to say that the scenery out west destroys everything in the east, but I'd say the latter has a huge advantage over the west once you head underground. We'd experienced 2 cave tours while in the state, starting with Majestic Caverns, a tourist attraction in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. It felt like I just entered a theme park, and in many ways, it is, so if you find yourself having to wait a long time for a tour here, well then there's something to do. Tours run you about $35 per person and last approximately an hour, so it's definitely a little steep for a cave, but with how popular this spot is, it makes sense it would be that way. The reason it doesn't exceed an hour is because once you head through the man-made entrance, you'll realize that this is basically just one room. But here's the thing, it is an enormous room and it has a huge quantity of cave features that are just incredibly intricate. Things like stalagmites and stalactites here are all the more beautiful as they have this darker hue to them. And that's probably Majestic Caverns' most unique aspect, as it has one of the largest accumulations of onyx marble formations on Earth. Most of them are continuously growing, so it's for that reason guests are not permitted to touch any of them despite how close you're able to get. The cave also has a lot of history, as there's evidence that it was formerly used by Native Americans and was mined during the Civil War. There's some cool stuff that was left behind that your guide will talk about. To touch on the main room a bit more, it's just over 10 stories high and larger than a football field. But the particular cave network itself is quite small, and there's only one place where the cave continues for any distance beyond the main room. At the left end of the rear wall, the cave continues some 200 or 300 yards, ending at a small pool of water. And because it was a decently long passage, it really felt as though it had become a self-guided experience, and that was a great way to throw some variety into this overall. While there's a lack of diversity in this cave and it's on the shorter end for a tour, Majestic Caverns does something to prolong it that I've never seen or heard of before. That's a lights and fountain show that takes place on the inside of the main room. During the previous parts of the tour, none of the equipment even remotely took away from the immersion, and that's because what they have to work with is pretty small scale, while still being really impressive due to the location. It lasts a couple minutes and I was just blown away. It's not something I signed up for, but I thought it made for a banger conclusion to our time here. So all in all, I would definitely put Majestic Caverns in the upper half of cave tours I've done. Oh man, I didn't know what to expect going into Majestic Caverns, but that was such a unique experience. It was mostly a guide, but like there was also parts that were self-guided, and then you had of course that fountain show at the end, which is so unique. I've never been in a cave with one of those.
Yeah, just the fountain show alone was worth it. I've never seen it in a cave, a whole light and fountain show that's so unique and so cool. And the cave itself, the big room, is beautiful with tons of awesome formations. Top-notch experience, yeah.
From Majestic Caverns, we had a short distance to go before hitting the border of Talladega National Forest. Within its borders is Cheaha State Park, and this area has so many layers of protection for two reasons, not to mention any unique geological or biological reasons. One, it's the southernmost part of the Appalachian Mountain Range, running from Alabama to Maine. No doubt the most impressive parts of the more than 2,000-mile range are the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee, plus nearly all of upper New England. However, even these areas with smaller elevations are quite stunning and just as lush. 2. Cheaha contains Alabama's natural high point at 2,407 feet. With how dreary of a day it was, we weren't feeling great about our chances of getting any view out of this, but we still decided to send the hour-long drive and test our luck. Just before reaching the top, we were surprised by the sporadic bits of blue in the sky, however, this gave us a false sense of hope. When we arrived at the state park, we were completely engulfed by clouds, so unfortunately, this would turn out to be a little bit of a bust. We've made it to the high point of Alabama. The views are amazing, aren't they?
Yeah, you can see for feet.
Yeah, that's pretty much accurate. Unfortunately, it seems like this is going to be a bust, which is such a shame because probably 150 feet below the high point, it seemed like it was actually going to be all right.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the view before on the internet, and it's not like a crazy view or anything, but it's still a solid view, and it's just kind of a shame to drive all the way out here to see just clouds, basically.
There is not going to be another opportunity on this trip or even in the future when we might come back to the area.
Yeah, this is way out here for us, and so we were like, let's just come so that way we can say we've been to Alabama's high point even if we just can't see anything. So it was still worth it just to say we've been to Alabama's high point.
At this point in the trip, we were ready for the absolute mob down to the Gulf Shores in New Orleans, but several days later, when we looped back around towards North Carolina where Evan lives, we found ourselves at another handful of Alabama nature spots, including several interesting caves. And our second official cave tour would be located at Cathedral Caverns State Park, Alabama's single largest cave. This is another one where you'll want to book in advance if possible, or else be ready to wait a few hours as it gets very busy here. Cathedral Caverns was developed as a tourist attraction in the 1950s, declared a National Natural Landmark in 1972, and designated a state park in the year 2000. All of this is for good reason, as this is by far and away one of the most extraordinary caves in America. For starters, it's got an enormous entrance measuring 25 feet tall and 128 feet wide, believed to be the widest natural entrance to a commercial cave. The scale of the interior is ridiculous too, as you're pretty much in one room for the entire time, but it's broken up into distinct sections due to how much more dramatic the formations get the further you go. Our guide was absolutely incredible, with his brain filled to the brim with knowledge about the cave's features, plus he had a comforting and pretty hilarious southern accent. Now's probably an important time to mention that a tour here lasts around 90 minutes and covers 1.5 miles round trip. So you go pretty far in there, and there's not 1 second where I wasn't engaged by my surroundings. One of the highlights came pretty early on before the density of large formations became abundant, and that's this absurdly big column known as Goliath. It's one of the largest stalagmites in the world, measuring 45 feet high and 243 feet in circumference. You'll pass Goliath on the left, but on the return trip you'll actually be on the other side, which is where you have this large pool that perfectly reflects the cave off of it. You don't see things like this too often, but when you do, it is absolutely awesome. And that's not the last time you'll spot water, as there's a giant river flowing through the midway point of this cave, or at least the part regularly visited. Our guide told us all the stories about how high it's flooded, which was cool, but also a little terrifying. Some more interesting stuff, you have this large flowstone formation with a gentle waterfall going over it, a stalagmite that has been called improbable due to its insanely small diameter and shocking height, and from here we noticed a conglomerate of stalagmites, stalactites, and columns in the singular area referred to as the Big Room. It's fully loaded with some of the largest formations I've seen in a cave, and the way the trail maneuvers around them is sensational. There are tons of intriguing perspectives and angles that allow you to appreciate the Big Room in full. And you know, they call it the Big Room, but really this is like a room within a room. In many ways, that makes it even more impressive knowing it miraculously exists in the midst of all of this. The Big Room is what single-handedly propelled Cathedral Caverns into my top 3 caves ever, and it's not 3. The only one I can confidently say I prefer is Carlsbad Caverns at New Mexico's Carlsbad Caverns National Park. But I'll tell you what, this is not far behind, even though it's a hell of a lot less known. Finally, the path ends at a viewing platform where you basically look out into the abyss. It's amazing how long this one passage is, and it makes you realize how insignificant you are in relation to the cave. I seriously love this place so much. Please visit if you ever find yourself in Alabama. Cathedral Caverns, it was described as our guide as the best kept secret in the state of Alabama, and I totally get it. Some of the scale of this is ludicrous.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of caves, and I can honestly say this is easily one of the best in the entire United States. It's incredible. It's probably the highlight of Alabama for me. It just blew me away. You go through that first part where it's just kind of the giant cave rooms, and you get to this last part with stalagmites and stalactites. I mean, it really does remind you of a cathedral. It's that beautiful.
Some context for the final 2 spots I'll be talking about in this video is there's something called the Southeastern Cave Conservancy, which is the largest land conservancy in the world solely focused on protecting caves. They manage more than 170 caves in 7 states, but Alabama might have their most famous ones. The organization takes preservation very seriously, so in order to visit either of these two sites, I'd suggest getting a permit for your desired date months in advance. It was actually the very first thing we booked when we began planning this trip through the South. The first of these is the Never Sink Cave Preserve, which is home to the Never Sink Cave. This is a mile round-trip hike with 331 feet of elevation gain. I'd personally recommend downloading an offline map so you don't get lost, though there are markers that'll guide you through the forest. We were quite literally the only ones out here, unless you count these two snakes we saw along the trail. I never see things like this while hiking, so this freaked me out at first, but once we warmed up to the idea of them being there, it was actually pretty awesome admiring them for a little while. The Never Sink Cave is really more of a sinkhole or pit than it is a cave, but it is so deep that the bottom can only be accessed through technical rappelling systems. Thanks to its fern-covered ledges and gentle 160-plus foot waterfalls, it is absolutely one of the most iconic formations of its kind in America. We actually didn't realize at first that you weren't supposed to be able to see the bottom of the pit, so we got a little too close for comfort at the top. But once we acknowledged that, it actually became a highlight of the scene as it gives it this mystical vibe. I can't say I'd seen something in nature that actually intimidated me until this. What a badass spot.
We tacked on the Never Sink sinkhole, and I was not expecting it to be this impressive. It's ludicrously deep. Like, it's actually terrifying to stand next to it because there's no fences. It's like life or death when you're standing next to that thing.
Yeah, it is crazy with the water flowing down it too. It's just absolutely absurd. And yeah, you can't really even see the bottom of it because we're both don't really want to lean over too far because we don't want to lose our balance. But you can't really even see the bottom. It's crazy how deep that thing is.
Not to outdo Never Sink Cave, but up next was our most anticipated location in Alabama and one of our most anticipated of the trip. Located in the Stephens Gap Callahan Cave Preserve is the Stephens Gap Cave, probably a top 5 most unique thing I've seen ever in my life. The trail to reach it is a similar difficulty to the last one at 1.5 miles round trip but 255 feet of elevation gain, and similarly have the offline map handy. Like at the Never Sink Preserve, we were the only ones here, and that made this place significantly that much more impactful, and you'll see why. Stephens Gap Cave is relatively the same upon first glance, with a seemingly never-ending 143-foot deep pit, and gentle waterfalls flowing into its inside. But if you notice down at the bottom, there's a full-fledged waterfall, and I don't exactly understand how it formed or exists. But it's difficult to admire fully without getting closer to it, so it's really a shame that's not an option. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. What differentiates Stephens Gap from anywhere else I've been is you're able to embark on a self-guided caving experience to the waterfall, which doesn't last that long, but from start to finish, it is euphoric and unbelievable. The Southeastern Cave Conservancy requires you to have a helmet and a real flashlight in order to go inside, so we bought cheap versions of both at a Walmart just before our visit. Personally, I think a phone flashlight should have been allowed as a substitute since there's also natural light to help you out, but I don't make the rules. A helmet, on the other hand, makes perfect sense. I noticed 1 or 2 small rocks fall from the ceiling, not to mention all of the waterfalls flowing through cracks in the ceiling too. When we first turned the corner, we couldn't believe A, that we were in Alabama, and B, that we were still on planet Earth. I shouldn't have to explain why this is one of the most impressive views of the trip, but I will anyways. The 150-foot high waterfall, upon more research, flows from a fissure in the limestone making up the walls of the pit. And it's not just one waterfall, as you have the gentler streaks of water coming from the very top, as I said. The scale of it all is crazy, and I will never ever forget standing and looking up into the sinkhole opening. This is a place that those of you watching who think you're capable need to see if you're a fan of hiking or the great outdoors. It made for a truly unforgettable final impression to our time spent in Alabama.
Wow, that Stephens Gap Cave, that was unlike anything I've ever seen. What a way to cap off the North Alabama video with easily the best spot in the state, in my opinion. One of the best waterfalls I've ever seen, one of the best singular views I've ever seen.
I can't put that into words. That is unbelievable. That's one of my favorite things I've ever seen in my life. That's just amazing. I can't believe that's here.
As you can see, Alabama has a little bit of everything for lovers of nature. I knew the state was going to be overlooked for this kind of thing, but I still didn't expect it to deliver quite like it did. I know a lot of people who take trips to the eastern US for places like the Great Smoky Mountains, but guess what? All of the locations in this video are less than a 4-hour drive away from the Smokies, so if you wanted to incorporate Alabama into a trip like that, you absolutely could, and I would absolutely recommend it. Be sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe to Travel Dash for more content like this in the future, and with that being said, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye guys.